Welcome to this episode of Artist Tales, the podcast that features and celebrates artists from different walks of life. I'm Heather Martin, and I'm speaking with Karen Torley, who is a Derry, Londonderry-based puppeteer and theatre maker. We met through a mutual friend. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Great, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and, what you do with the puppeteering and, what is a theatre maker as well.
Well, I've been a puppeteer for 30 plus years. I make puppets, all different types of puppets from various materials, from wood or styrofoam, paper mâché, anything really. I use lots of object theatre puppets. And I tour shows, so I tour around schools and theatres, festivals, art centres, and I also teach puppet making.
What's involved with teaching puppet making? So I must admit, I know absolutely nothing about puppeteering.
Well, maybe I should start where I started, because my family are puppeteers.
Sure.
My family I'm originally Scottish. I'm from a place very close to Edinburgh. My family have a puppet theatre in Biggar, which is just outside Edinburgh. It's a purpose-built theatre. They're called Purpose Puppets, and they do large-scale puppets which are worked in ultraviolet light. So they have their theatre is actually based on the penny plain tuppenny coloured theatres, the old Victorian theatre. So they purposely built it to look like a miniature theatre. So it's very magical for children to come into. And I started with them, but lots of my family have been involved in puppetry over the years. It's something that's often passed down families, actually. We have some Punch and Judy in our background. Somebody in our family did that as well. And it's really a form of, I suppose, visual storytelling and using objects, puppets, reclaimed materials, and creating characters so you can storytell. So really that's the basic line of what puppetry is. I think it's a very ancient art form. It goes way back to, it's probably one of the oldest art forms. It goes way back to caveman times where they would create shadow puppets using flames and paintings on walls. And, shadow puppets are very, very old. It's probably one of the earliest forms. But every country, China has a tradition of puppetry, lots of glove puppetry and shadows as well. And every country has its own version of it. So it's a real sort of mixed pot of ideas and cultures, and it's performed all over the world. And it's one of those art forms that has never died out. It's kept growing and growing. It's not very big, strangely, in Northern Ireland, but in other parts in Southern Ireland, there would be a lot more puppeteers around. But definitely in lots of European countries, it's really one of the major art forms, but not so much here. It's seen often as a children's art form, which of course it isn't at all. Adults can really appreciate puppetry as well.
So what brought you to Northern Ireland?
Well, I met someone who was from here, so that's how I ended up moving here. But I was in Norwich before that, working with Norwich Puppet Theatre. I was working with them for about 7 years, and then I met a friend of mine who were working together. We set up a company together, which we call Banyan Theatre Company, and we specialise working with younger children and using object theatre, which is a form of puppet theatre that is all about the transformation of everyday objects.
And you said that you teach puppeteering, so what does that involve?
Well, quite often I would do master classes with theatre practitioners. I would work in the university teaching drama students and puppetry. But it's an art form that is very difficult to get training in. There are some places. There's a school in Charleville-Mézières, which specialises in puppet theatre, and there used to be the Central School of Speech and Drama in London, which had a puppetry course. But at the moment, there's very few places where you can actually train as puppeteers. So most people, when they decide to be a puppeteer, they work with companies, work within different companies, or they work with puppeteers and they start gaining skills. Dance and mime and circus and those types of very physical theatres usually lend themselves to performers that work really well with puppetry. So quite often I would work with drama students, and we'd work with paper or objects and create a relationship to build puppetry experience. But recently I've actually been working with nurses as well. In a local university, we've developed a program where they work with the decommissioned dummy type characters, the mannequins that they learn lots of their procedures on. So lots of them are decommissioned because they've got bits falling off them or they're just not operating as well. So I was brought into a local university to help animate them, to work out how they could be animated so that nurses could respond to them with more empathy. So it's been a really interesting sort of sideline of the type of work I do. But I also I've been working with older people with dementia and tapping into how memories and objects can stimulate lots of emotions and thoughts and memories that other things can't. There's something about an object. I'm sure we all carry objects from our childhood with us, and puppetry is a way, I suppose, of exploring and taking that step further.
And it sounds like when you're creating the puppeteer, not puppeteers, sorry, the puppets themselves, it sounds like it's kind of, you really build up, you almost taking different types of materials and things depending on what you're building. How involved is it for you to build these things? Are some of them a bit more straightforward, or can it be quite consuming?
Well, I mean, it can be either. It can be you can make it a very instant, quick puppet. The way when a child plays, they can turn something into a puppet. So in the same sense, you can pick up an object and by breathing life into it, you can create a puppet. A puppet is really just an inanimate object that you are lending a life force to. So you can actually, you can create it from a teddy bear, when it's got loose joints, makes a great puppet. But in the same way, you can spend, weeks, months creating a structure which is beautifully carved, and you can work with wood and do beautiful joints. And like marionette puppets are very technical, so you need to be a very good maker to make a marionette because it's all about weight and balance. Whereas you can make a simple structure from paper and you can manipulate it. And it's not to say one is better than the other; they're just very different skills. When I create a new show, like for instance, I would work a lot with fairy tales. So I would I suppose a very simple explanation would be one using Goldilocks and Three Bears. So the story is based around bears, obviously, but porridge and bowls and spoons. And so I took that idea into the idea of a picnic. So the bears were made out of the bowls and they used spoons for the hands. So it's just taking the design concept, I suppose, from the story and then playing with it and taking it a step further. And it's a great way for children to relate, especially because I work a lot mainly with children. So it's a really good way for them to access what you're doing. They can access something that they're familiar with. It's a good first form of theatre for children to find accessible.
Do you do predominantly theatre, or do you do television and film as well?
Well, recently I have been working on a feature film as a puppeteer, which won't be out until 2023, but it's been a really great experience. My cousin, my family were involved in puppetry. So my cousin, he works a lot in television puppetry and movies, Star Wars, and, there's obviously with the Henson Company and puppetry is used a lot in television. I haven't done a lot of that work. I've done a little bit. I've dipped into it, but there are definitely puppeteers that is their work and they concentrate on the film. But it was really exciting. Recently working on a movie, it was really great. Puppetry and acting and performance, they're all so tied in together. They're all aspects of, the same thing. So it's really good to connect with other performers in that way.
Yeah, and is there a very good network of puppeteers?
Most puppeteers know each other. It's a very small world. Especially in the UK, there's a lot of puppeteers know each other because there's not a huge amount of us, and a lot of us have trained because as I said earlier, there's not a lot of training for it. So most people train with various companies. There's a theatre in Islington in London, Little Angel Theatre, and lots of us have worked there or been involved in putting productions together, directing them, or being trained there. There's one in Norwich. There's the one in Scotland. There's my family's one in Edinburgh, but also the Scottish Mask and Puppet Centre in Glasgow. But there are very few. So I suppose that makes us all know each other in the same, in a way that maybe other art forms wouldn't have in the same way.
You mentioned that you predominantly do theatre, but you've done a little bit of television and film. How different is it doing theatre versus TV or film?
Well, I don't know if it's different, apart from the main thing being you're not working with a live audience, and you're not improvising in the same way, I suppose, because the whole thing about working live is you're feeding off the energy of the audience, and and it's a two-way street when you're performing live. So you're performing to the audience give life back to you, and you perform. I mean, if you've got an audience that are not responding to anything you do, there definitely is not the same energy in the performance. The energy definitely comes from the audience as much as it does from the performers. So when you're working on film or television, I suppose you're being more technical because you're not being as playful. So in that sense, it's a little bit different.
And it must be kind of hard if you're used to feeding off of the audience in that sort of sense, the energy of the audience.
Yeah, I think it's a very different skill. I think that's why quite a lot of people will specialize in one or the other. It's not that there aren't crossovers, but yeah, people usually, like I say, my cousin, he works mainly, that is his main work. It's not his only work, but his main work. And
you've mentioned you do your own play, you kind of build your own play. Build, I don't know if build is the right word, but you kind of...
Yeah, build is good.
You're a puppeteer, aren't you? So you build probably the puppets, but also build the actual, story that you're doing. What's that like for you? What's the process you go through?
Well, I mean, usually the process would be, depending if I'm creating the story from scratch or not. I have an absolute love for fairy tales. So I do work a lot with the old fairy tales. I really love the depth that they have and the different meanings and the morals and everything that's underneath them. And I've always been fascinated by fairy tales. So I would work a lot with that. So when I start to put a production together, I usually start with the story and then I play from there. But the magical thing about being a puppeteer, I suppose, is the fact that you can dip into all those aspects. You do a little bit of writing, or you're performing, you're making, you're creating a set, you're basically creating a whole world, and it's really, you have to have lots of, I suppose you dip into lots of different skills. It's a really creative job to have. It really pushes you creatively because you have to dip into so many different parts of yourself in order to create something. I love the creation process. I love when you sort of have, I don't really know how to word it. I suppose you grasp that idea and then you start running with it and you see where it takes you. And then you end up with this finished product. I mean, it is really an enjoyable process to work with.
So it sounds very all-encompassing, really. Just you're dealing with so many different aspects of the production.
Yeah, it is definitely. But that's the magic of it. It is also sometimes the fault of it. And it's why, as much as there's lots of good puppet theatre, there's lots of really terrible puppet theatre. Because it's one of those things when people saying, "Oh, that's great. I'll buy a puppet from a shop, or I'll make a little sock, and it has its." Whereas maybe if you go into a big theatre production, you've got somebody who's doing the set, someone's doing the lighting, somebody's doing the sound. Whereas a lot of puppeteers, most of us, are really doing a lot of it, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. So in that sense, sometimes it can be a plus, but it can be a minus as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how collaborative, I don't know if collaborative is the right word, but how, whether you're working with other people to put on a production, or is it more of a one person doing it, one kind of one-man band, or one-person band, I should say?
I think it's really, it depends on what you're doing. But it's certainly really good to, when you're creating a production, is to have a director, because puppetry you're very focused puppetry is about focus, really. If I'm a puppeteer, my focus is on the puppet, and the puppet's focus is on what it's doing, and then, the focus is very inward, even though you're playing out to an audience. So if you don't have a director, it's very difficult. Some puppeteers have worked with mirrors. I would never work with a mirror because you're taking yourself out of what you're doing. So it is important to have an outside person. And of course, expertise from people that are, that are directors or script writers. Or puppetry doesn't work very well to be too script-based, because it is a visual art more than anything else. So, and it's easy sometimes to get bogged down in words. But the puppets are so visual, they create their own language. So it's really good to let the puppet develop itself without getting bogged down with learning too many lines, which is also good, because I'm really bad at learning lines. So yeah, it has a bonus there.
You said you like doing fairy tales, and does that allow you, or how much does that allow you to kind of explore things without saying a whole lot?
One good thing about fairy tales is most of us know them, although I've got to say, in like my generation growing up, fairy tales were really well known. Whereas this new generation, they're not being told as much. There's a lot more cartoony things and Peppa Pigs and A lot of the fairy tales are getting lost a bit, and I think it's really important to keep them alive. They're part of our traditions and our history. And I mean, every country has fairy tales, and every country has its own version of different fairy tales. So I think it's really important to keep them vibrant and alive. And it would be really sad if they got lost. So, and you can be really creative within them. I mean, I've seen so many productions of the same show. Like, for instance, Little Red Riding Hood is a show that was created by myself and Joy Haynes, who was my Banyan partner when we set up. And we used lots of object theatre and that. It's one of those shows that is such a great story because it has some fear in it for the children, so they can be safely scared. They can be a bit scared, but in a safe environment. And it's a really epic story. There's lots happening. There's lots for the children to relate to. But I have seen lots of productions and lots of different companies doing Red Riding Hood, and every single one is different. They all have a different emphasis. They have different puppets. They have a different style. So there's lots of scope to really just put your own fingerprint on what you're doing, I suppose.
And how important do you think it is for you as a puppeteer to see other people's work, to see, even if it's a similar or same story that you're probably working on or have done or planning to do perhaps? How important is it for you just to see other people's work?
I think it's really important to see it, but not just puppetry. I mean, I love dance and ballet. The dance would be one of my favorite art forms to go and watch. And I suppose because it's movement based, and I really love visual theatre, visual storytelling. I think it's really good to see other shows and other people's work, but I don't go and see a lot of puppet shows. I think we're probably going to see different forms of other theatre. Maybe it's because I'm in Northern Ireland too, and there's not a lot of puppetry around. But I suppose when I was living in Norwich, there was lots of puppeteers and lots of shows, and the theatre were bringing lots of shows in. In that time, I was seeing a lot more. And if you go to a puppet festival, which they have all over the world, then you get the opportunity to see lots. But I mean, often you're on the road yourself, so you're out doing puppet shows, and then when you're off, it's not always your first choice to go and see another puppet show. So in that sense, I suppose I don't see as many as I used to.
And you mentioned earlier that there's probably a bit of a loss of the fairy tale storytelling to children. What sort of reaction do you get, if particularly if it is a story that might be a bit unfamiliar to them?
To be unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
Well, children really engage with puppets so well. It is really magical. I mean, quite often when I'm doing a show, it might be the child's first experience of theatre. And it's really magical to see how they engage and they really connect with the characters. And I think it's really important that within a show, no matter what show it is or what you're doing, that there is a character that a child can empathize with and that they can connect with. I think it's really important. It's like, I suppose, in the same way, if you go to watch a movie and you can't relate to any of the characters, you just start to drift away from it. I think it's the same type of thing, but especially for a child. So children respond so well to puppets and puppetry. They like to join into the story. They like to connect and they like to be part of it. And without being panto with it, I'm not really, when I do shows, I'm not really wanting them to be shouting it's behind you, but I do like them to be able to respond in a vocal way as well as visually watching it.
I was going to ask whether there's a bit of interaction with the crowd or with the audience.
I mean, the shows that I do are mainly I work on my own. So most of the shows I do now, it used to be more with two of us that toured together, but most of the shows that I do now are one-woman shows. So it's really important that I can interact with the audience because otherwise I'd be very lonely. So I go between storytelling. So I work as a storyteller as well as a puppeteer. There might be times where I'm outside of the puppet because I'm storytelling or I'm creating the scene or the ambience, so what's about to happen, and then the puppets take over. So I can dip in and out of that. It also keeps you connected to the children. So I don't work behind anything, so I don't have a screen and you can't see me. I'm always there, so I can be seen. But with my focus and the way I focus on the puppets, then I disappear just because the children are looking at the puppets, not me.
So I guess in a way it's a bit less scary. You're not sort of
Yeah, well, I can be scary too.
Well, yeah, probably scary. Scary is probably the wrong word, but you're not. It's not. I'm just thinking it's not some disembodied voice somewhere, kind of giving context.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of puppet shows are like that. I mean, and children love that too. It's just a different way of being. It's just not the way I work.
And what sort of, as a puppeteer and as a theatre-focused puppeteer, what sort of challenges do you have?
Well, I mean, I think when you work in the arts, it's always a challenge, and the challenge is part of the problem, but also part of the reason we stay there. I think people who work in theatre like new challenges and like to step up to different things and experience new things. I think that's definitely part of the appeal. I mean, at the moment, it's been such a difficult year for the arts, well, a difficult 2 years for the arts. I found it particularly difficult at the beginning when a year's work disappeared into the oblivion. It just disappeared overnight. For the first 2 weeks, I think I just sat down and cried going, what on earth am I going to do? Because I had a sudden realization that my work is who I am. It's not just what I do for a job. And some jobs are literally that for people. They have their life and they do a job. And I don't think I realized, until it was all taken away from me, I don't think I realized how much of it was just who I am. So when it all first happened, the COVID, and it all disappeared, I really just was crushed, thinking, I don't know what to do, what to turn to. Do I give it up? Do I keep going? I really had no idea. And I suppose I never had realized before that it is so intrinsic for me. It is absolutely everything that I am is what I do for a job. They're inseparable, really.
And funny enough, I was going to ask you about COVID and the impacts of COVID. And I know as you said, it really has impacted a lot on, or quite significantly on, the arts. I mean, how do you find it now? I mean, are things kind of moving for you? Like, are there more opportunities, do you think?
I think quite quickly it did pick up, actually. After the first month, I think everyone was trying to find their feet and didn't know what they were going to do. And then I think people realized how much they needed the arts, how much creativity is part of our being and how much we need it. So slowly and gradually I started to get online work, which to begin with came from theatres looking for art-based activities. And because I'm a puppet maker as well, some of the work, actually, when I think back, it seems so long ago when it all started. It feels like we've been there forever, right at the very beginning, because I decided, no, I'm going to keep doing this. I think it was a very conscious decision. If I can at all, I'm going to keep, my theatre company and what I do. So right at the very beginning, I started to put a few things online. Would maybe tell a story or make something simple. Now, I am not a technical person. And right at the beginning, it was a challenge. Even simple things like realizing that your phone is better horizontal when you're filming, when you're putting it on YouTube, opposed to being vertical, because otherwise it cuts the sides off. I mean, the really straightforward, simple things I didn't have a clue about. So at the beginning, I started to film little activities and put them on my Facebook page for children that were at home and not at school. I started to tell a few stories just to keep engaged. And I got such a great response from it, and lots of, hundreds of people sort of watching. I was really surprised, and I thought, maybe there's something here. And then some theatres got in touch with me and asked me to do some workshops especially for them. So I would maybe make a 20-minute piece, which would be how to make a puppet from start to finish, or I started doing lots of craft activities where you did the same. And then I did some Zooms with schools, where the first Zoom I had with the school, I got to say, I found it very hard not to burst into tears, because I hadn't been in the company of anybody, but not children, for such a long period of time, and all their little faces started coming up in the boxes. I was like, my heart, just totally, it was really amazing, actually. Just seeing them and seeing them respond again, it was really quite incredible. And I think as difficult as it has been, I think we've all, anyone who adapted, because if you work in the arts, you had to adapt, and you had to get very quick at learning some skills and how to present your work and adapt what you were doing. And I think a lot of people stood up to the mark. A lot of people found ways that they could work still in the arts. And it's been quite amazing to see. But I do think as we start to come out of this, I mean, I know things are still very difficult, but as we slowly start to find our feet again and come out of this, I don't think it's all going to be negative, because already I can see my partner's a musician, so he played his first gig a couple of weeks ago, and the atmosphere was electric. absolutely electric because people were craving and desperate to see live music, to have a live experience, to be together, to appreciate something together. And it was actually quite an emotional experience. And I think whereas we've all got very complacent and used to be able to get everything handed to us on a plate when it comes to entertainment and theatre and the art, I think when we realise how important it is to our well-being to be creative, to share creative experiences, but also to appreciate it in a different way and to realise actually it is a gift to see a performance. It's a gift to hear music. It's a gift, to be part of something that we can all share together. So I think there's going to be a lot of positive things that come from what's happened.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something. I think, particularly the arts and other things as well, we took so much for granted where you could go out to the theatre, you could see a live performance, you could go to a restaurant, you could do all these things and meet up with people and not worry about, do I have to wear a face mask? Do I have to do this or that or the next thing? And I remember after the first lockdown when sort of things kind of opened up a little bit, you could get a takeaway tea or coffee or something and a little nibble. I remember going to a local cafe and got my tea, and it was novel, but also I realized, it was novel, but not novel, but I also realized how much I missed it. And I think you've touched on, until it's taken away, we don't realize how much we value, the arts or sport or whatever we're interested in. But I think you're right with the arts, because I think there's just something about the arts that just, I don't know, it kind of fills a void of something, or it connects us in a certain way.
Yeah. I think, without creativity, without the art, without being able to create and to watch and to all those things in our life, I think they're so important. And, it's what makes us human, really, is being able to create. And if it's not there, then what have we got? What have we got?
Indeed. And I think it kind of transcends things in a way that we can, often can relate to a story, even if it's, fantasy, or I tend to like bit more realism, but I do appreciate the more fantasy and that sort of thing because there is a story to tell, and as you said, often there's a character that I can identify with.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, one of the projects that I've worked on in the last couple of years, actually just before COVID and before the lockdowns, was with first responders. And it was a production that was done in the Playhouse Theatre here with a director that was over from London. It was working with people that have been through a lot of trauma. They're all the first responders and what they've seen and what they've done. And part of the reason, part of the work that I did with that group was working with objects. So I would bring lots of different objects in and we would create images on the floor or in our hands or storytell with them. And it was really amazing, the power of an object and the story it can tell, and how different objects, especially we were exploring how if you were an ambulance driver or working, the different objects that you have and how you use them and what you do with them and how the stories that they have to tell. The objects have a story to tell, and I suppose that is really what puppetry is all about. And it can tell stories in very light and humorous and funny ways, and it can relate to children, or you can use them for very serious ways as well. The objects that I brought into working with a group of people that had dementia and Alzheimer's was really quite incredible. Just how it opened a door which looked like was closed. It really opened up something and flourished new memories.
And I would imagine objects have very different stories for very different people.
Exactly. You might have something. You might have like one of the people that was in that group had brought in an really old teddy bear that had been his from when he was a child, and it was there. It didn't, in its ear was there, or it had bits rubbed off it, and it was like a really precious thing that he had carried all the way through his childhood. And he's got so many memories and shared experiences with that bear, and it was really amazing to hear him talk about that and sit with it and still treasure it in exactly the same way he did when he was maybe 2, and he's now an older, person. And yeah, objects carry so much weight, literally weight.
Looking forward, and it's really kind of my last question, sort of coming out of COVID, hopefully, COVID will be around, but just kind of to a point where we can manage it and lead, I say, fairly normal lives, if I can say that phrase, for lack of a better phrase. What's next? What sort of projects do you think you have planned?
I think part of the thing with my job and the way I work is I never quite do know what's next. I don't really know. I get led off in different directions. As I say, working on a movie came out of nowhere. In January, I'm going to be in Norway for a couple of weeks, working on an artist residency, so that'll be exciting. Hoping that I can get over there and there's not any problems by that point. I'm very open to whatever comes my way. I just love to be creative. I love new things to happen. So really, it's just a case of seeing what happens next. I do think there's a really strong future for the arts. The arts isn't going anywhere. We've been through a tough time. The arts has been through a really terrible time. But I definitely think that, it's onwards and upwards, and that you can only grow stronger and better and more resilient.
Well, thank you. It's been really interesting speaking with you for this episode. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Artist Tales. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Further information about the artist I spoke with is in the episode notes. Please rate and review this podcast on the apps and spread the word. You can get in touch by emailing artisttalespodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is on social media. Check the information in the episode notes. Hope you join me next episode